Look at this. You just stumbled into something biblical without even trying. You beautiful accidental exorcist, you. Unconscious spiritual fumigator. You walked through that door like it was Tuesday, and suddenly the walls stopped bleeding. The shadows retreated, the whispers went silent, the century-old curse just packed its bags and left, because you showed up smelling like purpose, and they couldn't handle it. You didn't even notice, did you, that the temperature rose 15 degrees when you crossed the threshold? That the black mold in the corners started dissolving? That the flies dropped dead mid-flight? You were too busy thinking about dinner or scrolling your phone or humming that song stuck in your head, while meanwhile you just performed a spiritual genocide on entities that had lawyers in hell, filing complaints about your existence. Let me tell you what really happened when you walked through that door, because you're sitting there confused, wondering why the house feels different, why the air tastes cleaner, why your chest doesn't feel heavy anymore. You think it's coincidence. You think it's imagination. You think maybe you're just having a good day, but no, my friend. You just accidentally became the thing nightmares warn their children about. They'd been there for decades, these things. These parasites, these ancient squatters, feeding on misery, recycling trauma, brewing depression in the walls like it was their personal meth lab, generation after generation of suffering. And then you showed up, radiating something they couldn't metabolize, something that burned their tongues when they tried to taste your energy, something that made them realize they'd rather dissolve than deal with whatever the hell you are. You want to know why they ran, why they scattered like roaches when the light hits? Why 100 years of darkness just said nope and evacuated? Because you're not normal. You're not regular. You're not one of the sleepwalkers they usually feast on. You're something else entirely, something they don't have protocols for, something their training didn't cover. See, most people walk into haunted spaces and they negotiate, they compromise, they coexist with the darkness. They learn to live with the weight. But you didn't even acknowledge them. You walked in like you owned the deed to reality itself, and they felt it. That unshakable certainty, that unconscious authority that makes demons check their contracts twice. They tried to read you when you first entered, tried to scan your fears, your traumas, your weak points. But what they found made them sick. Where they expected wounds, they found wisdom. Where they expected fear, they found fury. Where they expected victims, they found a veteran of wars they couldn't even pronounce. And suddenly they understood. They weren't the predators anymore. You've been through hell, haven't you? Real hell. Not this theatrical haunting bullshit, but actual soul-destroying, reality-bending, identity-shattering hell. You've had your heart ripped out by humans who smiled while they did it. You've been betrayed by blood. You've been abandoned in your darkest hour, and you've survived all of it, which makes you infinitely more terrifying than any ghost story. That's why when you walked in humming that stupid song, not even paying attention, something shifted in the spiritual ecosystem. You weren't trying to cleanse anything. You weren't praying. You weren't burning sage. You were just existing at full capacity, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was catastrophic for anything feeding on weakness. Because here's what nobody tells you about demons, about entities, about these parasitic presences. They're not actually powerful. They're just persistent. They're emotional vampires, spiritual leeches, metaphysical mosquitoes. And they survive on one thing only, the gap between who you are and who you think you are. But you close that gap without even knowing it. You integrated your shadow while making breakfast. You alchemized your trauma during your commute. You transformed your pain into power so gradually, so naturally that you didn't even notice. You'd become untouchable. And when you walked through that door carrying all that processed darkness, wearing it like armor, they took one look and knew they were outmatched. They could smell it on you, the scent of someone who's been broken and refused to stay broken. The frequency of someone who's died inside and chose to resurrect different. The radiation of someone who's made friends with their own demons and now walks around immune to everyone else's. You didn't need holy water. You are holy water. You didn't need protection. You are the protection. You know what's funny? They probably tried to scare you at first. Probably threw their best material at you. The cold spots, the moving shadows, the whispers in the walls. But you've been gaslit by professionals. You've been terrorized by people you loved. You've been haunted by memories that make their little tricks look like amateur hour at the community theater. What's a creaking floorboard to someone who's heard their own sanity crack? What's a cold breeze to someone who's felt their soul freeze? What's a whisper in the dark to someone who's had lies screamed at them in broad daylight? You're not scared of the dark anymore because you've been the dark. You've lived in it, breathed it, digested it, and came out the other side glowing. They must have panicked when they realized their usual tactics weren't working, when you didn't flinch at their presence, didn't acknowledge their performance, didn't give them the fear they needed to feed on. It's like a vampire trying to bite a mirror. All they got was their own reflection, and they didn't like what they saw. Because in your presence, they saw what they really were. Not powerful ancient beings, but parasites. Not demons, but dependencies. Not curses, but crutches for people who hadn't learned to walk through their own darkness yet. And you'd already graduated from that school with honors, with scars, with a PhD in surviving the unsurvivable. So they left, they had to. They didn't have a choice when faced with someone who'd already been through worse than anything they could create. You think you just walked in and the energy changed, but what really happened was an evacuation, a mass exodus, a spiritual fire drill where every negative entity in a 5-mile radius got the message, clear out. The real monster just arrived. And you're not even trying. That's what kills them. That's what makes this so beautifully brutal. You're not performing rituals. You're not declaring war. You're just being yourself. And yourself happens to be their kryptonite. Your existence is an exorcism. Your presence is a purification. Your breathing is basically biblical pest control. They're probably warning others right now, spreading the word through whatever network these things use to communicate. Don't go near that one. They're saying that one's different. That one's dangerous. That one doesn't play by the rules. We understand that one walks around leaking light like a broken nuclear reactor. And we can't process that kind of energy. You've become a no-fly zone for darkness, a restricted area for entities, a quarantine zone for anything that feeds on suffering, not because you're pure, not because you're perfect, but because you're processed. You've been through the machine and came out refined, distilled, concentrated into something they can't digest. Let me explain what you actually are, because you're still sitting there thinking this is coincidence, thinking maybe the house just needed air, thinking maybe you're imagining the change. No, you're a walking disruption field, a living virus in their operating system, a glitch in the matrix of misery they've been maintaining for generations. You know how some people are described as having an old soul? Well, you've got a war veteran's soul, a soul that's seen too much, survived too much, transcended too much to be affected by parlor tricks and amateur hauntings. You're like showing up to a water gun fight with battlefield experience. These entities took one look at your energy signature and realized they were catastrophically outgunned. Every trauma you survived added another layer to your armor. Every betrayal you processed became another weapon in your arsenal. Every night you chose to keep breathing when breathing felt impossible. You were unconsciously training for this moment. You weren't building walls, you were developing immunity. You weren't hiding from the darkness, you were developing antibodies to it. That's why you didn't even notice them when you walked in. Your spiritual immune system just automatically started eliminating threats like white blood cells attacking an infection. You didn't have to try, you didn't have to fight. Your very existence is antimicrobial to their kind of energy. Your presence is pesticide to their parasitic nature. They're gone now, really gone, not hiding, not waiting, not lurking in the corners hoping you'll leave. They're evacuated, relocated, seeking easier prey because you've made this space uninhabitable for them. Simply by inhabiting it yourself, you've accidentally gentrified the spiritual neighborhood, and the old residents couldn't afford the new energy prices. But here's what they didn't want you to know, what they were hoping you'd never figure out. You've always had this power. Every single human has the capacity to be their own exorcist, their own cleanser, their own spiritual authority. But most people never activate it because they're taught to fear what they don't understand, taught to seek external protection instead of internal power. You activated yours through survival, through refusing to let life break you permanently, through getting back up when staying down would have been easier. Every time you chose to heal instead of harden. Every time you chose growth over grudges. Every time you chose yourself over self-destruction, you were building this frequency that makes you uninhabitable to anything negative. And get this, you are none. You're not special in the way of being chosen. You're special in the way of choosing. You chose to metabolize your pain instead of marinating in it. You chose to transform instead of transferring your trauma. You chose to become the solution instead of perpetuating the problem. And that choice, that series of choices, made you into something entities run from. You want to know what specific frequency you're emitting that makes them scatter like this? It's the frequency of someone who's already been through hell and didn't let it make them hellish. It's the vibration of redemption without revenge, of power without cruelty, of strength without brutality. And that particular combination is like nails on a chalkboard to anything that feeds on suffering. Because suffering is their food source, their fuel, their entire economic system, and you've become someone who doesn't produce it anymore. Oh, you still feel pain, you still experience difficulty, but you don't suffer. You don't marinate, you don't ferment in your troubles. You process them like a factory processes raw materials into something useful. You've become emotionally renewable, spiritually sustainable, psychologically biodegradable. Your pain doesn't stick around long enough to attract feeders. Your trauma doesn't fester long enough to become food. Your darkness doesn't stagnate long enough to become a breeding ground. and that makes you absolutely useless to them. More than useless, actually, you're actively hostile to their existence because you prove it's possible to transform. You demonstrate that their food source isn't guaranteed. You show others that pain doesn't have to equal suffering, that trauma doesn't have to equal permanent damage, that darkness doesn't have to equal residency for demons. So now you're standing in this space that feels different, feels lighter, feels like someone opened windows that were painted shut for decades. The air moves differently, the shadows fall normally, the silence isn't heavy anymore, it's just quiet. And you did all that just by being too processed to process. You reclaimed this space without even knowing it was lost. You lifted a curse you didn't know existed. You broke chains you couldn't see. You evicted tenants you never knew were there. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is, you could do this anywhere you go because you've become a walking safe zone, a mobile sanctuary, a portable purification system. This is why certain people feel better just being around you, why some spaces feel different after you've been there, why problems seem to resolve themselves in your presence. You're not healing them, you're just showing them what healed looks like. You're not fighting their demons, you're just demonstrating what it looks like when demons become irrelevant. You've accidentally become what ancient texts described but couldn't explain, what religions tried to ritualize but couldn't replicate, what mystics sought but couldn't sustain. You're just a human who processed their shit so thoroughly that unprocessed shit can't exist in your presence. You're walking therapy for the atmosphere. You're accidental alchemy for any space you enter. The entities that fled when you arrived, they're not coming back. They can't. They've been essentially evicted by your essence, evacuated by your evolution, excluded by your frequency. You've made this space uninhabitable for anything that requires darkness to survive because you brought in a kind of light that doesn't turn off. Not the blinding light of forced positivity, not the harsh light of denial, not the fake light of spiritual bypassing, but the steady light of someone who's integrated their shadow. You glow differently when you've digested your own darkness, when you've composted your own pain, when you've recycled your own trauma into growth. That's the light they couldn't handle, the light that knows the dark intimately, but chose not to live there, the light that's been through the underworld and came back with souvenirs, the light that doesn't fear shadows because it's made friends with its own. You're not bright, you're balanced, and balance is the one thing chaos can't survive around. You've become the thing that things that go bump in the night warn each other about. You're the cautionary tale in their community, the reason they check addresses twice. Now the new protocol in their haunting handbook that says, abort mission if the target has processed their trauma. Because processed trauma is poison to parasites. From now on, you're going to notice this happening more often. Spaces clearing when you enter. Problems dissolving when you engage people. Feeling better after talking to you, even when you didn't try to help. You've become accidentally therapeutic, involuntarily, cleansing, unconsciously healing, just by existing at this frequency. You can't turn it off either. That's the thing about becoming authentic. You can't go back to performing. You can't return to pretending. You can't squeeze back into the box of who you used to be. You're stuck being this powerful, stuck being this clear, stuck being this inadvertently purifying, to everything around you. Some people are going to avoid you now, not consciously, but instinctively, the same way those entities fled. People who are committed to their suffering, who are married to their misery, who are feeding their own demons, they're going to feel uncomfortable around you because your presence asks questions their demons don't want answered. But others are going to gravitate toward you like moths to flame, not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're emitting something they need. You've become a lighthouse for people ready to process their own darkness, a beacon for those ready to evict their own demons, a signal that says transformation is possible because look, I did it without even trying. You mastered something without meaning to, something most people spend lifetimes trying to learn in ashrams and temples and retreats. You learned how to be so thoroughly yourself that nothing false can survive in your presence. You learned how to be so integrated that fragmented energies disintegrate around you. Last and ridiculous, death. Death thickened grudgingly. Death broke. Death. You had to indulge. You didn't study this, didn't practice this, didn't even believe in this, but you became this through the simple act of refusing to let life make you less than you are. Every time you chose growth over comfort, every time you chose truth over ease, every time you chose healing over hiding, you were building this immunity to darkness. Now you walk around accidentally blessing everything you touch, unconsciously consecrating every space you enter, involuntarily, sanctifying every situation you engage with. You've become holy water in human form, not because you're pure, but because you're processed, not because you're perfect, but because you're integrated. The demons that fled when you walked in, they're telling stories about you now, warning others, describing the human who walked in humming and destroyed a century of careful cultivation without even noticing. You've become a legend in their world, the accidental exorcist, the unconscious cleanser, the one who purges without trying. This is your legacy now, not what you build or achieve or accumulate, but the spaces you clean just by entering them. The energy you shift just by being present, the healing you cause just by existing. You're leaving a trail of purified spaces behind you, like breadcrumbs of light in a forest of darkness. Every room you've been in is a little bit cleaner. Every person you've met is a little bit clearer. Every situation you've touched is a little bit lighter. You're not doing this on purpose. You're just leaking light wherever you go, bleeding brightness into the world, shedding sanctity like dead skin cells. Years from now, people are going to wonder why certain spaces feel different, why certain homes have that energy, why certain places feel protected. They won't know it was you who walked through once. Maybe stayed for coffee, maybe just passed by the window, but left behind an energy signature that makes darkness think twice. You're writing history in frequencies instead of words, leaving legacies in vibrations. Instead of monuments, building cathedrals out of cleared energy instead of stone. You're the reason some spaces never get haunted again. The reason some darkness never returns. The reason some demons add addresses to their do not disturb list.